All right, so today we are diving into the world of the Internet Archive.
Okay.
And, you might know them as the folks behind the Wayback Machine.
Right?
That tool that lets you go back and look at old websites.
Yeah, it's really cool.
But that is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's true.
We are talking billions of web pages,
Mm.
millions of books, music software. It's like a digital library of Alexandria.
It's really amazing what they've done. They've taken on this massive responsibility, safeguarding our digital history and making it all available to anyone.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And their mission statement kind of says it all.
Huh.
Universal access to all knowledge.
Ambitious. Right.
Yeah, a little bit ambitious. But here's the thing.
Okay.
The Internet Archive is smack dab in the middle of some legal battles that could drastically change its future.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
We're talking lawsuits, copyright clashes, and a whole lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, a lot to untangle.
Yeah, and we've got news articles, legal analyses, even some panicked Reddit threads to go through today.
Yeah, it really all kind of boils down to this tension, this fascinating tension between that desire to preserve digital history
Right.
and then the complexities of copyright law.
Yeah.
Copyright is meant to protect creators, but it gets really complicated when we're talking about a nonprofit organization like the Internet Archive
Right.
that just wants to make information free.
And it's interesting because, online content, as we all know,
Yeah,
can vanish like that.
it's true.
Websites get redesigned, companies disappear,
Hmm.
tweets fade into the void.
The Digital Disappearing Act.
Yeah, it's like entire chunks of our history just evaporate if there's nothing like the IA out there to...
Yeah, or think about, it's not just about old GeoCities pages,
Right.
although I do love those.
Sure.
But, the internet touches everything.
Yeah,
News education, government transparency, social movements. It's like,
it's true.
imagine trying to research a historical event.
Yeah.
Or fact-check a news story if you didn't have access to those original sources.
That's actually kind of terrifying. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Yeah,
And it makes these legal challenges against the IA even more significant.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into this legal showdown.
Okay.
The case that kind of set off all the alarm bells is this Hachette v. Internet Archive case.
Right.
Big name publishers here.
Yeah.
Hachette Penguin, Random House HarperCollins. They are not happy about the IA's digital book lending program, Open Library.
Yeah, it all comes down to this idea of controlled digital lending CDL.
Okay.
So, imagine you lend a friend a book, right? They borrow it, read it, and return it.
Yeah,
CDL kind of applies that same principle to digital books.
makes sense.
So the library owns a physical copy, so they argue they should be able to lend out a digital version
Right.
to one person at a time.
Okay, so it's like checking out an ebook instead of physical book.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
But of course it gets complicated,
Yeah, I bet it does.
especially when the pandemic hit.
Oh yeah, here we go.
That's when they launched the National Emergency Library.
Okay.
Libraries were closed,
Right.
so the IA decided to temporarily lift that one borrower at a time rule for ebooks. So multiple people could be accessing the same digital book at the same time.
I
So
see.
he saw it as a public service,
Right.
in a crisis.
Yeah.
The publisher said, absolutely not.
And that's what kind of sparked this whole thing.
Exactly.
The publishers are saying that the IA is acting like a pirate website,
Right.
that they're undercutting ebook sales,
Yeah.
hurting authors.
And, the thing is, they haven't really been able to prove that
Right.
the IA is actually impacting book sales.
Mm-hmm.
There was an expert report suggesting that the opposite is true,
Interesting.
that the IA's lending practices had basically a negligible impact on their bottom line.
So if it's not about profits, then what is this really about?
Well, some people argue it's about control.
Okay.
Publishers are making a lot of money from ebooks these
Yeah.
days.
Right. Ebooks are huge.
Especially, those licensed to libraries.
Right.
And those licenses often come at a much higher price than physical copies.
Interesting.
So they see CDL as a threat to that,
Okay.
like a way for libraries to potentially bypass those hefty licensing fees.
So it's a long game they're playing.
Exactly.
It's not necessarily about the immediate financial hit, but what this could mean down the line.
Right, because if the IA wins this,
Yeah.
it could fundamentally change how libraries acquire and lend digital books.
Which, let's be real, is probably the future of reading.
Exactly. And, I can't remember if we talked about this earlier, but there was that Economist report
Yeah.
that found that 90% of a book's sales happen in the first 5 years.
Oh, wow.
The IA is mostly lending out older books, stuff that's out of print.
Oh, interesting.
Which is not really, making the publishers money anyway.
So it's like the IA is trying to preserve access to knowledge,
Yeah.
especially for like
Mm.
these books that are kind of feeding into obscurity.
Right.
And the publishers are trying to like maintain control over their intellectual property.
It's like this microcosm of this bigger struggle
Totally.
over information ownership in the digital age.
Yeah, it's a big question, like who owns information?
Huge.
Who gets to decide who can access it?
And it gets even more complicated when we start talking about music.
Oh, boy.
Mhm.
Oh, all right, well, let's move on to that then.
Uh,
Okay, so we've got this huge legal battle going on with digital books.
right.
But,
It gets even wilder.
oh no, what else?
Music.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Okay, so bring me up to speed what's happening in the music world.
So there's this other lawsuit, UMG Recordings v. Internet Archive.
Okay.
This one focuses on the IA's Great 78 project.
Great 78 Project.
Yeah, they're trying to preserve and make accessible all those old 78 RPM records.
Oh, you mean those like scratchy recordings of like early blues and jazz and stuff?
Exactly.
You
It's
class-
like a gold mine for music lovers, historians.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to hear like the roots of modern music.
Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
But I'm sensing a but coming.
Yeah. The music industry is not known for being flexible with their copyrights.
Right.
And this is one of those situations where like there are some pretty big legal risks for the IA.
Like, what kind of risks are we talking?
Well, we're talking about statutory damages,
Okay.
which are basically huge fines for every copyright infringement. And we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, even for like preserving music history. That seems like a lot.
It is, and it gets even more complicated
Oh, no.
when you realize that the UMG lawsuit specifically targets 2,749 digitized recordings.
Okay.
So if the IA loses this one, they could be on the hook for like $400 million.
$400 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so huge potential fines, thousands of recordings on the line. What are people saying? What are the arguments here?
So UMG is claiming that the IA is basically like a massive music piracy operation.
Okay.
Hurting artists, damaging their bottom line.
Right, right.
The IA obviously disagrees.
Yeah, they're going to say it's about preservation.
Exactly. They say it's about providing access to cultural heritage, not undercutting the music industry. And they argue that these recordings are often like really difficult or impossible to find elsewhere,
Right.
and that their digitization and distribution falls under fair use.
Okay, so we're back to this idea of fair use. Can you just remind us quickly what that means?
Sure. So fair use is this legal principle that allows for limited use of copyrighted material
Right.
without permission from the copyright holder.
Okay.
So it allows for things like, commentary criticism, news reporting, education.
So they're saying this falls under education.
Yeah, that's their argument.
Okay.
But the courts haven't always agreed on like exactly what counts as fair use.
Sure.
Especially with something as massive as like the IA's collection, and copyright law can be
A little murky.
a little unpredictable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This is a lot.
it is.
This isn't just about like a few books or songs or whatever. This is about like the future of information.
Absolutely. If the IA loses these lawsuits, like the ripple effects could be massive.
Yeah, like that Reddit thread that we talked about earlier.
Right.
People are seriously freaking out
Understandably so.
about losing access to like old websites and out-of-print books and all this stuff that they love.
Yeah, like the internet might feel permanent, but it's actually incredibly fragile.
Right.
Like content disappears constantly, often without a trace.
It's true.
The IA is like trying to hold on to those pieces of our shared history,
Wow. Okay, so what happens next? What can we do?
Well, the legal battles continue, but the important thing is like this isn't just something happening to someone else.
Right.
This impacts all of us, and we need to be aware of what's at stake.
So what can we do?
We need to support institutions that are fighting for the public good.
Like the IA.
Exactly like the Internet Archive.
Donate.
They rely on donations to keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been really interesting.
It is
A
fascinating.
little bit terrifying.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me, at least, is that the Internet Archive is a lot more than just nostalgia.
Right.
Like looking at old websites. It's about like our collective memory.
Exactly. It's digital heritage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really important stuff. So I think with that, dear listener, we will leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
If the Internet Archive, this incredible digital library of Alexandria, is facing an uncertain future, what responsibility do we have to help ensure its survival?
Something to think about.
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.